Right, let's get the thought of a man who it's cheesy when people say needs no introductions, but this is someone who's been writing about the NFL for almost 5 decades, is a Hall of Fame voter, and is one of the best followers on social media you could possibly find. Also a former colleague of Brian's, which puts him in the same rarefied air as me. What a wonderful thing to be. John McClain is with us. John, how are you doing, sir?
Well, I'm doing great, but I definitely need an introduction into the UK.
Look, John, you just heard us talking about this Buffalo Bills team, about Josh Allen. We've been discussing whether, essentially, if we were to be redrafting the league right now, do you consider taking Josh Allen #1 overall? He's playing that well. All of your years following the NFL, how impressed are you with what this Bills team are putting together, and how do you rate their chances of taking the AFC?
Well, first of all, I watched Buffalo lose in Houston 23-20, and Josh Allen have the worst game of his career. Texans limited him 30% completions. They didn't get a lot of sacks. He didn't throw a lot of interceptions. They just pressured him and played him great. And the Bills haven't lost since, and Josh is catapulted to the top of the list for prospective most valuable players, and he's earned it. Now, if Kansas City has to go to Buffalo, Kansas City's won in Buffalo in the playoffs every time they've played. Kansas City last year, divisional round, 7 degrees, blinding snowstorm, they won. Some people think the Chiefs are just biding their time before they turn it on. But remember, last year, Kansas City lost 6 games during the season. Now they've lost 1. But they won when they had to. They went to Baltimore and won the championship game to go to the Super Bowl and won again. But I think this Chiefs team is flawed. I think this is going to be the time for Josh Allen to win at home in the playoffs over Patrick Mahomes and go to the Super Bowl to play Detroit, which I watched come back from 16 behind against the Texans and went on a 52-yard field goal with no time left, despite throwing 5 interceptions. So my 2 Super Bowl teams, Detroit and Buffalo, really struggle with the Texans, but I think it's clear to everybody those are the best teams.
John, you've been covering the NFL for forever, but you covered some of the best Bills teams in their history. Jim Kelly, you were around for the comeback, and Frank Reich covering that live. How does this Bills team with Josh Allen, Sean McDermott, compare to the best Buffalo teams in NFL history? And if you know Bills fans, should they be believing that this could finally be the year? They've been in the Super Bowl before. Well, I was just talking about this, but they've never been able to win one before.
I covered their 4 consecutive Super Bowl losses. I felt so bad for the players, Coach Marv Levy, but especially their fans. It's just too much torture for the Bills to go back to the Super Bowl and lose another one. I don't know if upstate New York could take it. This Bills team doesn't have nearly the kind of talent that Marv Levy's 4 consecutive Super Bowl losers had. They had Hall of Fame quarterback Jim Kelly, Hall of Fame running back Thurman Thomas, Hall of Fame receiver Andre Reed. They were loaded with talent, where this one is so dependent on Josh Allen. If he has to play great, and if he doesn't play great, they're vulnerable. Fortunately for them, he's played great. He's hungry. He just got engaged last week to Haley Seinfeld, an actress who everybody here knows. So this is the best time of his life, and he is playing like a man possessed, but he does not have the supporting cast that Jim Kelly had. And but it doesn't mean they can't win the Super Bowl. If they do, if Detroit or Buffalo wins, I don't know how anybody could be disappointed, because we have, until Dan Campbell got to Detroit, they'd won 1 playoff game since the 50s. 1. And Dan Campbell's turned them into a power. And of course, the Bills have been good for a long time. They win the AFC East now every year since Tom Brady's been gone from New England. But I think it would be best for the league if it's Buffalo versus Detroit. And I think fans all over the country could get behind that Super Bowl in New Orleans.
Look, John, I know we've only got a limited amount of your time, so we do have to ask you about the developing situation in Houston right now. Azeem Al-Shaair, 3-game suspension for the hit this past weekend on Trevor Lawrence, the Jags quarterback. They are going to appeal that 3-game suspension. Interesting sounds from inside the building from DeMeco Ryans backing his guy. It feels a little bit like a moment where maybe a little bit of humble pie just needs to be eaten and they need to accept that this is what's going to happen. What did you see of it being in the stadium? How did you feel about that moment and the reaction to it?
It was a dirty hit. It was a blatant dirty hit. And there's a lot of people trying to say here in Houston that it was Trevor Lawrence's fault. No, it was not Trevor Lawrence's fault. Watch it in slow motion. He started his slide. When a quarterback starts to slide, a defensive player knows to back away. Not only did Al-Shaair not back away, but he went in with his forearm. And it's interesting to me because the guy that hands out the discipline in the NFL, John Runyon, who started his career with the Houston Oilers, then went and got famous with Philadelphia, was known as the dirtiest player in the NFL. So who would know cheap shots better than John Runyon? So they suspended him for 3 games. He will appeal, maybe get it to 2. Those 3 games are a killer. Coming off their bye week, they play Miami, Kansas City, and Baltimore in a 10-day span. And DeMeco Ryans said after the game, when they gave up 2 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter after being ahead 23-6, how much they missed Al-Shaair. Well, if they missed him against the Jaguars, they're damn sure going to miss him against the Dolphins, the Chiefs, and the Ravens. And what's interesting to me is the way he's being portrayed around the country by people who don't know him. In the locker room, he's a really quiet, nice guy, team leader. Players love him, team captain. And when DeMeco Ryans supported him, you have to do that. When you're a coach talking to the media, you're not talking to the media, you're talking to your players. You don't care what people around the country say. You want your players to listen, and you want your players to know you've got their back. Now, I thought he went overboard and gave the Jaguars players, he ripped them for starting a fight, and I tweeted that I covered every game he ever played. And watching him as a player, if he'd have been close by, and his quarterback, Matt Schaub, had been cheap-shotted like that, he wouldn't have stood around with his hands on his hips. He'd have been all over the perpetrator.
I actually think in that situation, in fact,
that.
I actually think in that situation it's really telling when you get a team who don't jump on it.
Right.
And I think
they let their quarterback take it. Right?
Yeah, and actually Al-Shaair even said it in his statement afterwards. He said, I don't blame those Jags players for jumping on it because that is the natural instinct to do. If you've seen a moment like that, you jump in and you get involved because not only you should do it with any of your teammates, but the quarterback is the guy who gets protected more than anyone else. The question, I guess, John, is whether that punishment fits the crime, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to ask you, John, because you have the historical perspective, right? Like, would he still have been suspended 3 games for that exact hit in that situation in the 1970s or 80s? I don't think he was, but I think the flip side of that, and I'd love to get your opinion, is the game has changed so much. You never really see hits like that anymore. How would that have looked in 1970 or 1980?
People would have yawned and gone back to the huddle because it was not against the rules. There's a lot of younger nincompoops here trying to use Darryl Stingley, the receiver, and Jack for New England, and Jack Tatum, the safety from Oakland, who was the hardest hitter in football, known as the dirtiest player. He hit him over the middle, paralyzed Stingley for the rest of his life. Well, that wasn't against the rules. You could hit receivers anywhere you wanted. You could hit them in the head when they came across the middle. And the problem was Stingley lowered his head. He wasn't penalized. Tatum wasn't fined. He wasn't suspended. Nobody thought anything about it because it was legal. An Al-Shaair hit like that would have been legal. If you'd have slid back then, you'd have been kicked off your team by being a wussy. Well, today it's changed, and you got to be disciplined, and you got to make sure you follow the rules. And Al-Shaair didn't, and he's a repeat offender. He got into it with the Bears in the second game. He hit Caleb Williams on the sideline, then got in a fight, threw a punch, and in John Runyon's explanation about why he suspended 3 games, he pointed out, you got in a fight, you ripped the guy's helmet off, you kept fighting, you didn't leave the field, so he's got nobody to blame but himself. He's a really good player. Everybody loves him, great guy, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your character is. It matters what you do on the field, and he broke the rules.
I think everything you've said there is correct. But everything we now know about CTE, everything we now know about safety, everything that now happens in the league, and all the rules that we know are in place, it does make what happened inexcusable.
Yep.
They can stand, and I agree. John is absolutely right. D'Amico Ryan's right to back his player. Like, that he loses the locker room if he doesn't. But there are people online who are calling for, as long as we're going to see Trevor Lawrence out, he should be out. That he should be banned for a year for this. That he should be. Does the league need to send a bit of a message of we need this to get out of the game, because otherwise we're starting to get.
I think the three-game suspension, that's big for a hit anymore. You don't really see that. That is the message. The 3 games toward the end of the season, you don't really see the NFL come down. Usually it's 1 game. Kareem Jackson former Texan had a lot of issues last year. You don't see a 3-game suspension anymore. That is a large suspension. That's almost a quarter of the season.
So do the NFL need to say no to the appeal then?
Let's ask the general.
Well, they could say no to the appeal. Sometimes they reduce it. I've seen it reduced when I thought there was no way. So it could go down to 2 games. Texans need him in the worst way, but by getting suspended, he's hurt his team. But you'll never see more than anything like 3 games. I don't believe the union has become stronger, and now maybe they'll turn down the appeal, because it's certainly going to hurt the Texans. You know, one of the things you take into consideration is how are his actions affecting his team? Obviously, the action is affecting the team.
John McClain, brilliant stuff. Absolute legend. Thank you so much for joining us, John. Really appreciate your time. And, well, if not before, we'll see you in New Orleans. Brilliant stuff, John McClain.
You can follow him on Twitter at McClain_ NFL. I always struggle to say that, but I think that's what it is.
Yeah. No, honestly. And
that was great stuff. That was good to see John on talkSPORT End Zone in the United Kingdom.
He was very tempered there. If you follow John on social media, like, he will say that's the worst hit I've ever seen, and he will call out D'Amico Ryan for being dreadful. I think that was very much I'm in an interview, I'm going to be professional, John. Social media, John's a bit wilder, trust me.